Loved mountains. I grew up in the Midwest. It was hilly and nice, but there was just nothing that elevated my soul heavenward than standing before a mountain and going, let's do it. And so many times in my life I'd had opportunities. I actually went to seminary in Denver, Colorado, and I swear to God, the only reason I got there was there were these beautiful mountains on the cover of the course curriculum catalog. I said, oh my God, I can be close to God there now, so that's how I ended up there. And since then, pretty much every place I've lived in my life has been quite mountainous. Mountains are very symbolic of God's presence. Moses goes up the mountain to meet God. Jesus often goes up into the hills, into the mountains to pray. From the point of symbology, a mountain is as close as you can get to heaven without actually leaving earth. Okay? Now, when I was living up in the interior, I was in the Okanagan Valley, and I was living in a town called Kaleden. And Kaleden is basically built right up the side of a mountain. This town starts on the lake, and everything's just sort of built on levels right up until you get to the very highest areas of the town. And I was living on one of the main roads, and behind my house was a rock face. It was several hundred feet high. It was just a rock face. And there was a road that went up kind of along the side of that face and then took off in another direction. But you could get up to the top of there from the road, and there were other places you can access it. And there were many times when, like a Sunday morning or Saturday, I was out watering my garden, and I could hear these little voices coming from somewhere, and then realizing that some teenagers had somehow gotten themselves to the very top of this rock face, and we're going to actually climb down the rock face to get back to the ground and go home. Because clearly they'd been out there all night camping on the top of this rock face. And I thought, you know, it's been a very, very long time since I've climbed a mountain, and I would love to get up to the top of that space. And so I decided to make that a bit of a goal. And so I would go out. My house was right next to the school, the elementary school, and then the road came along the side of the school, and then it just went up the hill, and at any point you can get off the road and climb up to the top. And so I kind of set a goal for myself. There were a couple of trails that went up there, and it was a wonderful experience, finally, for the first time in a long time, to just feel that sense of invigoration and that sense of getting to the top of the mountain. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Do you know what the hardest part of that was? Coming down. Coming down is so hard on your knees and your hips and your ankles. It's like once you get to the top of the mountain, you're really only halfway there, because you have to come back down. And that's the metaphor for the journey, the spirit journey of our lives. Every so often we know that we need to take time apart. And we need to maybe go on retreat, or we need to go on vacation, or even just take a day and go to the beach or do something different, because it lifts our spirits out of our everyday and helps us to have those transformative moments. But getting there is only half the journey, because the rest of the journey is coming back to your everyday life and the people that populate it and the problems that sort of describe it in your daily life. And what that we have to understand about the journey up the mountain, and the journey of retreat, or the journey of whatever situation brings you a transformation in your life, is that the transformation doesn't exist for itself. journey coming down the side of that mountain on my knees, I think about Moses carrying stone tablets and bringing those down the mountain. Ouch. That was the most important part of the journey. It was not so much going up to meet God, but bringing God through the word of commandment down the hill and to the people. When I lived in Berkeley, I was doing some postgraduate work, and I was living in a house. We were a small, intentional community, and we were sponsored by a United Methodist Church in Berkeley, and we ran a retreat center. And part of the house had been set aside for people who wanted to come on retreat. And one thing that we learned about retreat is when people are very busy in their lives and they decide they need to go on a retreat, on a time of spiritual renewal, they generally spend the whole first day sleeping. Because we forget how busy our lives are, and we forget how committed we are to our family, to our friends, and to our work, and to our community, and to what other services we provide within any of those areas of life. And people come to retreat. They come with the book they want to read, or they come with their Bible, and they come with their journals, and they come all ready to do the work. And they find that they spend the whole first 18 hours just sleeping. Just sleeping. Because part of the rhythm of our lives is we do need to go there. We need to lift ourselves out of the everyday so that when we return to it from the mountaintop, we have within us the gifts of the Spirit to transform the everyday and to make it something else, something different, something better, something blessed in some way. Excuse me. When Jesus goes up to the mountain with Peter and James and John, we're told that they went up there to pray, and this is something that Jesus did regularly. The mountains were, for him, I'm sure, that more metaphorical image of closeness to God, but also the place where you just go away and you exist very unguarded and unprotected in nature. And it's a place where you can go and be undisturbed, and a place where you can find that one-on-one quality of your life with God. And Peter and James and John are there, and they experience something there that they've not seen before. And they experience a presence, and they experience his power. Now, it's very common to compare Jesus' transfiguration with Moses coming down from the mountain. And because he's been in the presence of God, his face shines. It's like he's reflecting light. And it's a frightening thing for people. And so he wears a veil over his head. And there's a tendency to make a comparison here. But what we read is that Jesus' countenance was changed. His garments were glowing. We don't read that his face was glowing. We just read it was changed. But his garments were glowing. His clothing was glowing. And then we have also the presence of these pillars of the history of Israel. Moses, the prophet, who is basically the formation of the civilization of Israel, and Elijah, the prophet, who carries forth the promise of Israel and Israel's salvation. Jesus and John the Baptist were both compared to the prophet Elijah. Now, this idea of building tents for these people, Peter comes up with this great idea. Since we're all here together, let's have tents. Let's build some tents. This has, it might sound kind of humorous moment, but it has a basis in Israel's history. And the fact that when you are a wandering people, when you are nomadic people, you don't live in houses. You live in tents. And you pack them up and you take them with you and you set them up every time you stop somewhere. So your home is always something that you carry with you. The Festival of Booths is something that is celebrated every year in Israel, and it is a testament to the freedom of the Israelites from Egypt. And the fact that being set free doesn't mean game over, and it doesn't mean life all of a sudden turns into something wonderful. Being set free from slavery meant that they had to engage in a journey that brought them into a presence of self, into an identity as a nation. And they had to have that before they could claim their homeland. So this idea of creating booths or creating temporary residences for these spiritual beings was something that was in Peter's soul as a Jewish man and very tied to his Jewish faith and his Jewish identity. That when people visit, you find a place for them to stay. I think sometimes we have to really, really remind ourselves that all of these people in the New Testament were either Jewish or Gentile, but they were all Middle Eastern, okay? As was Jesus, as was Peter, as was John, as was James. And they were Israelites. They were Hebrews. And so they responded to this experience the only way they knew how. Okay? But the word that comes down in response to this is listen. Peter is always the one who's the first to respond to a situation, the first to say, I'll do this, or let's do that, or I'll never let you down, or something like that. He's always the one who is first with the words. And every once in a while he needs someone to tell him to stop talking and just listen. And we work along those lines sometimes in our lives as well. And sometimes the transformative experience, the transfigurative experience, the mountaintop experience that we might have at any given time in our life, or any given times in our life, is the experience of just listening. Just listen. Pay attention to what's going on. And that is the message you carry with you. Now, as I've said before, when you get to the top of the mountain, you are only halfway there, because you still have to come down again. And it's very important to understand that Jesus barely gets his feet on the ground at the base of the mountain when someone is asking him to do a healing. So the mountaintop is perhaps for your own transformation, but the journey down is where your transformation meets the community that you are in. It's where your feet hit the floor and where your path begins. We all seek those mountaintop experiences, and we need them. We need them because they are our spiritual connection with our Creator. They are our connection with God. But our connection with God only has its value when it moves us in to the community of faith. When it moves us outward and tells us how we then transform the world around us. And it can be a hard journey. It's hard on the knees, the ankles, the hips. It's a slog. It's a slog. But unless the people that we live with, unless the communities that we live within are transformed or transfigured as a result of our mountaintop experience, basically, it was just a walk in the park. We go to see the light. We come back down to carry it with us. It's important to understand that we need those times apart. It's important to give yourself the time to stand apart, to be one-on-one with God. But to understand that that is only part of the journey. And the journey is only complete when you have come back down the mountain and you step out at the base of the mountain to bring the hope of transformation to the people.